You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 179. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. What is your favorite thing to procrastinate? I know, procrastination, right? It's one of those things, we all do it. And actually, when you start thinking about it, it can be pretty juicy. You can get to know yourself pretty well by looking at the areas in your life where you're putting things off. Now, if you procrastinate, not to worry, you are not alone. We all procrastinate. And what I'm excited to share with you today is a protocol for you to follow in the event of a code P, right? Code procrastination. Now, today's episode is designed for you to really coach yourself. This is something that clients bring to me often, right? They are struggling with procrastination for whatever reason. And what I love to do, and the reason why I'm always really happy when people bring this problem to me, is I love to help you set yourself up for success by creating a protocol that works with your natural strengths, that works with your natural habits, that will actually help you overcome that procrastination. For myself, I have done a lot of work on procrastination. This is something I used to do a lot of when I was a student, when I was a junior lawyer, when I had more elasticity in my time. Now that I'm a coach, now that I'm a parent, I have more constraints on my time as a parent. And as a coach, I have a lot more tools. I have a lot more awareness about why I'm procrastinating, where I'm procrastinating, physiologically, what is going on. And as a result, I also have ways to get out of that procrastination and get the job done. So I'm excited because today you're with me. We can have a conversation. I can help you develop a protocol that is suitable for you, that is tailored for you, so that next time you have a code P, you're able to follow your protocol and find your way through it. So taking a big step back, why is procrastination a problem? Probably pretty self-evident, but it robs you of your time, right? If you think about procrastinating, if you have a 2-minute email to send and you spend 15 minutes procrastinating, you've now added 15 minutes to that task. It can undermine your confidence. So if you find that you put things off and you start to undermine that sense of accountability with yourself, that can have effects on your ability to get your work done, right? You don't feel like you're going to deliver when you say you're going to deliver. That can undermine your self-trust. And it may also occupy a lot of mental energy, right? All that space where you're thinking about procrastination. You might feel embarrassed about procrastination. You may have that inner battle about procrastination. And I want to help you with all of those things. Now, if you think about fire drills, right? Schools that run their students through fire drills on a regular basis, or every time you get on an airplane and you are walked through the process of what is going to happen if there's a problem with the plane, right? We all know you put your oxygen mask on first, and then you help the people around you. Hospitals have a code blue, right? In life or death situations. So there are instructions, there are protocols that are put in place that you can then turn to when you have an emergency situation. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. Now, I'm also going to create a protocol checklist, a physical downloadable document. And so when you listen to this episode, if you go to the webpage that hosts this episode, the show notes, you'll be able to find a link to that protocol to have that written out checklist. So go and download that if that will be of service to you. If you can't find it, send me a note. I will send you the link. And the idea there is for you to have a takeaway, something that you can refer to that will make this protocol even more actionable for you. I would also refer you to a download that I have, which is a roadmap of all the podcast episodes that I have recorded about time management. There are a number of podcast episodes there that talk about procrastination. So that's another tool for you. Again, I will link to that in the notes that go along with this episode. So a couple of tools that you can go to after today's episode if you're looking for further support. So turning to your protocol, what I'm going to offer is really 5 steps. And I'm going to walk you through those steps. And as I do that, I would invite you to think about your own practice, your own places where you like to procrastinate, and how this is going to apply to you, how you're going to create your own protocol that you can rely on when you have that code P situation. So step 1, where we're going to begin, is to know your triggers. What will trigger a code P for you? Now, this is fun. This is a really fun exercise. We get to think about all the places where you are going to procrastinate, because what I've noticed about my clients, what I've noticed about myself, is that there are certain things that I will procrastinate, whereas there are other things that I will dive straight into. So what do lawyers commonly put off? Well, here's a list. You might see yourself in some of them. Number 1, research, right? Big, heavy research tasks, right? I used to do these as a lawyer. I now work with lawyers who do these tasks. And what you might find is that these projects, these research projects, can feel tedious. They can feel time consuming. It might be hard for you to carve out that time in the first place to get into the right mindset to do that research. You might find that your brain starts to hurt as you're reading all the cases and you're trying to figure out the common threads. You may feel a lot of pressure as you're doing that research to find the right answer, make sure that you don't miss anything. You're trying to then compile that research in a way that is concise and yet is complete. So you might have a lot of negative thoughts about the project that lies ahead of you, and you might anticipate that this is going to be somewhat painful. So that is one area where you may find that you put things off. Another place where lawyers often procrastinate is writing. So if you are a litigator writing a brief that is going to court, or a brief that's going to opposing counsel, and you're thinking about not only making the best argument for your client, but how is this going to be received by the judge? How is this going to be received by that lawyer who you know is going to tear that thing to shreds, or they're going to do the best job they can to tear that thing to shreds? So you may find that there's, again, a lot of pressure. You're expecting perfection of yourself. And so you put this task off because what you don't want to do is create this thing. You're so fearful almost, right? There's that anxiety, there's that dread about what's going to happen. And so you push it off. Another area where you may be procrastinating is due diligence and document review, right? If you are sifting through dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of documents, maybe it's a huge, huge project, and you are responsible for identifying certain things, and you may look at that task and feel like it is just daunting, right? It's maybe something that doesn't particularly appeal to you. Maybe once you're in it, it starts to feel a little bit more interesting, but just getting the inertia to get started feels really heavy. Then you may push that off as well. You may also feel like this is a task that you easily lose focus. And so it might be really hard for you to get into it and maintain focus. And then you might also find that there are things that you put off, like difficult conversations. So if you need to give constructive feedback to somebody else, if you need to ask somebody to do something for you, if you need to be seeking feedback from someone and you dread what that feedback is going to be, maybe you've got lawyers, colleagues, opposing counsel, clients, people where you feel like the relationship is a little bit difficult, you might avoid those conversations. And so you procrastinate. Now, as I was thinking about procrastination for my clients, I also thought about where I like to procrastinate, because I find I'm quite good at getting myself focused and executing on work tasks. But there are still things where I notice that I am procrastinating. So I thought I'd share some of my favorite go-tos with you. Short term, I divided them into categories. I like to do that. So short term, what do I find I procrastinate? Emails that involve my schedule. So if I have an email and it requires me to put a calendar appointment into my calendar, I might put that one off, because anytime I have to open my calendar, I find it's a little bit painful. That's probably a signal to me that I maybe have some work to do on how I schedule my time. It's a work in progress, as it is for everybody. But that's something that I will dread. And so I have to really conscientiously not procrastinate that. If I have to impose on somebody to do something, I may put that off as well. I don't like asking people to do things for me. So I've noticed that there's an email right now that requires me to reach out and ask somebody basically for a favor. It's been languishing in my inbox because I don't want to do it. And sometimes it's dealing with something messy. So if I have an email and I open into it expecting it to be very, very simple, and it requires me to do something and think more than I had anticipated, then I might put that off because I cannot respond to it in 2 minutes. And so it needs to find a spot in the calendar where I can actually give it the right amount of thought. So those are areas where I find I will put things off. And so I have to be really disciplined about making sure that if I am putting those things off, either I'm doing them or I'm deciding, actually, you know what, that's something that I'm just not going to do, right? Sometimes we procrastinate because we've taken something on that we don't actually want to do. That's kind of another category, because what I'd love to focus on today is procrastination where you want to do the task, but that bigger picture is, are there things there that maybe we should start clearing off of your to-do list? I mentioned there were short-term procrastinations. Oh, before I forget, the kitchen table. Not really job related, although I do have some work items that are there. Our kitchen table has become a resting spot for all sorts of things. Our children's art projects, some of my work projects, various odds and ends that have just piled onto the kitchen table. That is a project that I am procrastinating. Yes, it would be something that would be wonderful if it was all decluttered, but I keep putting it off because every time I look at it, I think, it's going to take forever. I don't want to do it. There's got to be something else for me to do. So those are some of my go-tos. I would invite you to think about what your go-tos are. Those things around the house, around your office, where you are simply putting them off. Now, long-term projects, this is where the important but not urgent category comes into play. And we all have these. All the lawyers that I work with have important and not urgent projects. And those are the most at risk of procrastination because billable work, urgent work, client demands, timelines, those are always going to be given priority, right? Important and urgent will always be given priority over important but not urgent, unless we carve out that time and we stick to it. And that can be really, really challenging when you're already running a busy practice. So for me, what does that look like? Office paper, right? I've got office paper that I want to sort and file. I have my desktop on my computer where I'd like to tidy that up a little bit. And I have some larger projects for my business where, I need to send out an email or I want to get approval for CPD credit for something. And I just have kept putting it off because there are other more urgent and interesting and engaging and immediate projects. So that's some long-term procrastination. So for you, there may be files that don't have any immediate deadlines, so you keep putting them off, and then you start to feel a bit antsy, right? Ooh, actually, maybe that file does need to move forward. Or you have BD efforts that you want to make, but you feel like it's never the right time, so you put it off. Or you want to start networking and developing relationships inside and outside of your organization, but that would take time. And right now you've got to get your work done so you can get the kids from school. So you may be putting things off as well that are important to you, but where you cannot make the time, right? You do not make the time right now because there's other things that rank in more importance. So those are some examples of what you may procrastinate. In addition to the what is the when, right? What are some of the situations where you may find yourself procrastinating? So, for example, I know that when I am post-lunch, that is a time of day where I have low energy. It is hard for me to do things. I still do them because I have the pressure of knowing that my kids are going to come home from school, that I'm going to want to have dinner with them. So there's an end to my day. So even if I'm feeling really sluggish at 3:00, chances are I'll still be able to force myself to do some email, do some admin, do some of the tasks that I don't want to do because I know there's a hard stop at the end of my day. So for you, you may find there's an energy slump at the mid-afternoon point. And so you may want to plan for that. You know that you're going to feel that way. And so you want to plan in advance. It may also be more big picture. So lawyers that I work with who, for example, have a big trial, and then you finish up your trial. It was intense. You were in it for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. There were months of preparation that led up to that, and you're tired. You're exhausted. And if something doesn't have a short fuse on it and it's about to explode, it probably isn't going to really trigger much attention on your part. So you want to be able to plan for that in advance. It may also be that you are post-deal, right? I often use litigator examples because that's what I know, that's what I did, but for deal lawyers too, right? You may be coming out of a really busy season, right? Maybe you deal with tax and it was tax season. So you were working around the clock, making sure that all your clients' deadlines were met. Maybe you had a really large transaction, your whole team was on it, the deadlines were super, super tight. There were a bunch of fires that showed up at the last minute, you've been putting those out, pulling all-nighters. So after something like that, it might be really hard for you to go back to regular life at the office and be productive. Same with vacation, right? If you go away for a few weeks and you come back, or maybe even a weekend, right? You go away and you come back and you're still in that vacation mode. It might be hard for you to then bring yourself back into the mindset of being productive. So this is step one, right? If we look at your protocol, the first thing that we want to do is to identify the places where you are going to procrastinate, right? This is beautiful. We already know ahead of time, these are the things that might happen. And that brings us to step two. We want to get more granular about what's going to happen in the moment, right? So the step here is to anticipate what you're going to do in the moment. I want you to think about what you're going to think, what you're going to feel, and what you're going to do. If you weren't trying to deal with the procrastination, if you weren't following the protocol, what would you do? So for example, if you think about kids in a fire drill, right? Let's say that the school never really did a fire drill. And so one day there was a fire, and then the principal announced on the loudspeaker, "Children, there is a fire." And the children all panicked, right? Oh my God, what do we do? We're in this classroom. How do we get out? And so they're all clamoring for the door at the same time. They're all running down the stairs. They're tripping down the stairs. People are falling down the stairs. The teachers don't know what to do because the kids are in chaos. Do they stay with the kids? Do they stay behind? Then everyone's trying to filter their way out. Then they leave the school. And where do they go, right? Do they go to the field? Do they go to the street? Do they go home? Where do they go? And so you can imagine in a situation where there's a fire drill and there is no plan, the chaos that ensues, right? People don't know what to do. They're thinking from their primal brain. They're scared. They're disorganized, and it results in chaos. So that's why we want to have a protocol, right? As much as the children may not enjoy this idea of here's the fire drill, we're all going to line up, we're going to go down the stairs in single file, we're going to meet in the gravel field, I'm going to take attendance, and we're going to stand there and wait for the fire trucks to come. It's a little bit dull, but it avoids all sorts of chaos. We want to do the same thing for you in your practice. So we want to anticipate what is going to happen in the moment. So if you have no plan in place for procrastination, right, you are going to have the trigger. And let's say the trigger that you're going to have is a complex research memo, right? What are you going to think in that moment? Well, you might be thinking, this is boring. This is complicated. If it's a huge volume of work that you have ahead of you, maybe it's overwhelming. Maybe you're telling yourself, I shouldn't have to do this, or I can always start tomorrow, right? There's a number of thoughts, and each of you is going to have a different track, right? A different playlist, right? Your favorite procrastination thoughts, and it's going to start to play, right? It might even have a tune to it, right? It's like, this is boring. Anyways, I won't sing for you, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? And I'm trying to make this real for you because this is what's going to happen, right? You're going to see the thing, you're going to want to procrastinate, and it all starts with the way you're thinking. So what are those thoughts? What's that playlist? If you were to give it a song theme, what does that theme song even sound like? That's going to result in you feeling a certain way, right? The most common feelings that I hear from my clients when it comes to procrastination is that you dread the task, right? You dread it. You just don't want to do it. You might feel frustrated that it's so complicated, frustrated that you don't feel like doing it, frustrated that it shouldn't be your job to do it. You might feel anxious, right? It's never going to be good enough. I'm never going to be able to draft something that withstands the scrutiny of the judge, of maybe it's the lawyer that you report to, maybe it's opposing counsel. So you've got that anxiety. You've got some flavor of discomfort, right? If you anticipated this was going to be a joyful process, chances are you wouldn't need to persuade yourself to do it. You would just go ahead and get it done, but you're feeling something here. So again, we want to go and maybe we take that playlist and we start incorporating the feeling. How are you going to feel in that moment? And then what are you going to want to do when you are thinking the thoughts that you are going to be thinking, feeling the way you're going to be feeling, overwhelmed, frustrated, discomfort, you don't want to do it. So you might avoid, right? Probably if we are talking about procrastination, you're going to avoid the primary task, right? The thing that you told yourself you would do, writing the memo, sending the email, having the conversation, but you're not going to want to just sit there and do nothing. right? That would be unproductive. And we all want to be productive and efficient. So you're going to do something else instead. What are some of the things that you might want to do? Oh, there's so many wonderful things that you can choose from, right? For example, and I like to give them little labels like procrastinate something, right? You might procrastinate work, right? You might find another task that you can do that's maybe a little bit more pleasant. Procrastinate email, right? You may have an inbox and there's a few emails in there that you could respond to and feel really productive, right? You're being responsive, you're letting people know you care, you're getting that hit of dopamine because you're checking things off your list. Procrastinate research. This is a painful one, right? I used to do a ton of research as a lawyer. And there is that point where research really is productive. And then it's almost like you can get past the point of being productive. So maybe it's procrastinate research where you've already done enough, but you're doing a little bit more because you just don't want to get to that next step, which might be writing the brief, sending the email, whatever that more painful task looks like. It might be tidying, right? Your office doesn't look super tidy. This is a really great time to declutter everything and, get that cool little air can thing to make your keyboard all nice and shiny or whatever it happens to be, right? You might decide you're really hungry. It's a great time for a snack or, oh, you haven't had coffee or tea. Maybe you're thirsty. So you might find all these different things that you can do that are not the immediate task. And that's in a default world, that's how you respond to the urge to procrastinate. So we now have identified in your protocol, number one, what your triggers are. Number two, what you're probably going to do, right? We know ourselves well enough. You know yourself well enough to know exactly what you're going to do to put off this task that you don't want to do. That's going to bring us to step 3. This is where we're going to choose something different instead. So we're going to start with your thoughts, feelings, and actions, right? The way you want to think about it, the way that you want to feel about it, and what you're going to do about it. So if your default thought is, this is tedious, I don't want to do it, it's going to be painful, we're just going to notice it and try substituting something else. So what might that be? This is important. This is a code P, right? This is a code P. This is me procrastinating and I want to do something about it. I can do this, right? I will feel so good when this is done. You might be thinking this is a great opportunity to test my protocol. So all we want to do here is just notice that there's a certain way that we have been thinking and we're going to either change that thought or supplement that thought, right? You might be telling yourself, I don't want to do this and I'm going to do it anyways. So it doesn't have to be an either or, but we're wanting to bring in something a little bit more productive, a thought that is actually going to generate a different feeling, right? So we may still have the dread, but we're also going to bring in something else, right? If you think to yourself, this is my opportunity to test my protocol, you might feel a little bit curious or excited or interested, right? Maybe this will work. If you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to get this done, you might feel determined. You might feel focused. You might feel like interested and engaged. You might decide that what you really want is to feel calm, right? To feel grounded. So you might think about what thoughts are going to generate that feeling for you. So thinking out loud, let's see, if I wanted to feel calm, I have all the time I need. I know that I can do this. I have done this before. I just need to follow my protocol. So maybe that's the thought, right? If you think about those kids, those teachers in the school that is burning down or where you're running that drill and it's not actually burning down, we want to generate calm there. So maybe that's what the protocol is doing for you. I feel calm. This is not a panic situation. I know what I need to do because I've already written out my protocol. And we're going to get into specifics about what your step-by-step is going to look like. So great, we've got that. That's going to generate that feeling of calm, focus, and security even, right? That you've thought about this in advance, right? Just like the schools, they created that protocol ahead of time using their most elevated brain capacity, right? They had input on that. If you think about airlines, when they designed their protocols, they're thinking about what happens in an emergency situation, and they're giving you a step-by-step process to follow. That's exactly what we're doing here, right? You're listening to this podcast, you're open-minded, you're curious, you're thinking, maybe this protocol thing could work for me. And so we're designing it now so that when you end up in that situation, when that code P bell starts to ring, you already know what you're going to do. So you're thinking about how you want to think in a code P situation, how you want to feel in that situation. And then finally, what you're going to do, those thoughts and those feelings are going to all direct you toward executing your protocol. And you're going to complete the dreaded task. So moving on to the next step, before we get to the step-by-step, is you may also want to reflect on the why, right? Why is it important for us to have this protocol in the first place? Because when you're sitting there at your desk and you have the lure of going to Starbucks and getting a pumpkin spice latte, maybe it's the beginning of the fall season and they just started offering their pumpkin spice line and, ooh, I really love those lattes. I love those lattes. What can I say? Or it's something else, right? Oh, that colleague of mine just got back from vacation. I really need to go say hello right now. It's really important to do it right now. Or my email inbox is looking a little bit crowded. I should probably, before I start anything else, get that tidied up. So if you catch yourself in the moment, you're going to need to give yourself a pretty compelling reason not to procrastinate. And this is where I would encourage you to figure out your why. Why is this important? What is important about this to you? So if you think about fire drills at schools or code blues at hospitals or airplane instructions for what happens if there's something that goes terribly wrong, there's an overarching goal of saving lives, right? We want to save lives. There are also goals like avoiding panic, right? It's going to make it a lot easier to save lives if people aren't really panicked and running around uncertain about what to do, trying to react in the moment. What else is important about this protocol? Why do we want to follow it? Well, it's an invitation, as I alluded to earlier, to use your prefrontal cortex, right? If you think about the way that we plan strategically, right? When we're planning for the future, we are using our executive functioning skills, right? Our skills to plan, to organize, to predict. And we are setting ourselves up for success using the highest level of thinking that we have. Now, when you are in an emergency situation, like the airplane is starting to shake and you're really, really worried, or the fire alarm is going off at school and you're wondering if you're going to be able to get out safely, you're no longer able to access that really high level of thinking, right? Chances are what has happened is you've now moved into that more limbic part of your brain, right? The more primal part of your brain that is designed for survival, right? It is short-term thinking. It's thinking in the moment. You may not have access to your full capacity. And so we don't want to leave that part of your brain in charge of dealing with procrastination. That part of your brain is going to say, you know what? This is not a good time to write that memo. This is actually a really good time to clean up my inbox. We like that part of our brain, right? It's there. It helps us survive. It's got to function, but dealing with procrastination is not its best job. So why do we want to have this protocol in place? Because we are going to be directing ourselves, right? We are supporting ourselves. We are giving ourselves a path to follow that will help us to achieve our greater goals, right? Our greater goals are to get the job done, set us up for success in the future, right? Our future selves are going to be a lot more thankful and a lot happier if we haven't left them with a giant brief to write with one day left, if we've managed to get ourselves to do the steps required days, weeks in advance. So I would invite you to think about why this is important to you, right? What is it that you are going to gain from having a protocol that you follow? You might ask yourself what procrastination is costing you, right? Is it costing you time? Is it costing you anxiety? Are you missing deadlines? Are people getting upset because you're missing deadlines? Are you losing credibility with your clients and your colleagues? What is the current cost of your procrastination? Or are you getting things done, but you're really having to stretch yourself at the end or push yourself at the end in ways that are not sustainable? So what are the things that you're doing that are costing you? And what would be the benefit if you were able to solve your procrastination problem? What would be on the other side of that? How much time would you save? How much anxiety would you save? How much more peaceful would your practice feel? So just to recap, we've talked about your protocol. I just want to let you know where we're at. Step 1 was to know your triggers. So what are those situations where you already know you're going to procrastinate? Number 2 was to anticipate how you're going to think, feel, and act in that moment. Step 3 is to choose, right? What are you going to choose to do instead? What other thoughts are you going to choose to focus on? How are you going to choose to feel? Again, that's channeling that determination, that sense of calm, that's a sense of order and focus. And then step 4 is identifying why this is important to you, right? What is your why? Why do you want to do this? And that brings you to step 5, which really is the ultimate following of the protocol, right? What we've done so far is kind of getting you ready for the moment. And now you're in the moment, right? You're sitting at your computer. You need to do the task. And what happens here? I've got a few suggestions for you. Number one is just a simple health check. Sometimes we procrastinate because we're tired, we're hungry, we're thirsty. This isn't a sort of, I'm going to go get a pumpkin spice latte because they're really delicious and I want to do it to avoid something. This is, I've been sitting at my desk for 8 hours straight. I still haven't had lunch and I'm feeling tired. Like, this is maybe not the best time to start a project without giving yourself a window of time to rest, to eat, to walk around the block, whatever that happens to be. So situationally, I'd invite you to think about whether there's something related to your health. Do I need a glass of water? Do you need a cup of tea? Do you need something, a walk around the block to basically reset and recharge? In which case, I invite you to do that and make sure that you're in the right space, right? The right sort of health space to do it. Now, I have noticed that procrastination can also come up when you are undercharged. I don't think that's a technical term. What I'm getting at is you're stretched. You've been stretched for a while. You're generally very tired. And that is more than I've been sitting at my desk for 6 hours and now I need a little mental break. That might be more in the nature of like, I'm really getting burnt out here. I'm really getting run down. And if that's the situation, we want to look at the more sort of ongoing health situation that you're in and start identifying steps to bring you out of that, right? I don't want to see you in a situation where your practice is unsustainable, where you feel like it's unsustainable because you may be putting things off because you're so tired, you just cannot bring yourself to do it. So that to me isn't so much that you're procrastinating. That's more like you're really struggling because you're kind of close to burnout. So we want to identify that and get the support that you need to start pulling yourself back from that. So I want to flag that for you in case that's something that is going on for you. That may not be procrastination the way that we're talking about it today. That might be something a little bit bigger that we want to give attention to and to support you in moving to a place where you're feeling healthier, where you have the energy to do the tasks that are on your to-do list. So that's step one. We want to do that health check, right? We want to make sure that when you sit down, you're ready enough, right? Now, if you are at the end of your workday and truly it's not going to fly, right? You've got a thinking task and you've already been thinking all day long, then what I would recommend doing there is to think about your energy levels. And if you're better off first thing in the morning, then maybe what you choose to do is to allocate time in that space you're in to do some of those, I'll call them menial. They're probably not menial, but the tasks that don't require a lot of brain power, maybe get some of those done and then maybe even set up a plan for yourself for the following day so that you're ready to hit the ground running. And maybe you do approach that task with a fresh brain, right? You have to evaluate the context that you're in. And is it truly a case where you should put it off to another time? Or are you just doing that for the sake of putting it off because you want to procrastinate? So I'll leave that with you. Sometimes you do want to push a task forward, but you want to be doing that in a very thoughtful and deliberate way. You don't want to be putting it off in a reflexive, I don't feel like doing it, so I'm going to decide not to do it, right? That's how we kind of get stuck in that procrastination in the first place. So we've done the health check. We have enough attention and energy to do the task. Then we're going to move on to a space and time check. So we just want to make sure you've got enough space in your calendar to do something. Now, I think we can easily get stuck in perfectionism in both of these categories. If you've got a big brief to write and you've got an hour, you might tell yourself, that's not enough time to make much progress, so I shouldn't bother. Whereas I would recommend if you've got an hour, you might ask yourself, what can I do in this hour? So you want to carve out pockets of time, right? You might have a 4-hour window, right? That you're able to do it. Great. So you've allocated that space in your calendar for you to focus on a project. Space-wise too, right? Your physical workspace. You may get stuck in perfectionism here as well as part of your procrastination in trying to set up the perfect workspace, right? Your desk needs to be free of any clutter and your the browsers on your computer all need to be closed or whatever it is. I'm inviting you to say good enough is good enough, right? If you've got the time in your calendar, maybe you're going to get interrupted, but it's good enough, right? Maybe you only have an hour, right? You do have an hour. Good enough, right? Your workspace is kind of messy, but you've got a task to do. It's good enough. So here, environmentally, from a time-wise perspective, you just want to give yourself enough time and space to have it good enough that you can get your work started. Now, what I would then invite you to do is to be very deliberate about how you plan and execute your task. the first thing I would invite you to do is to think about the exact result, the exact outcome, the deliverable that will be produced as a result of the time that you spend working. So if you go into a project saying, I need to write the memo, or I need to write the brief, or I need to review the documents, then it's very vague, right? In terms of what you actually need to do. And so I would invite you to think, what does it actually have to look like? And maybe the end goal is that you're going to produce a research memo that has chapters and headings and a nice executive summary at the beginning. So it's going to have different pieces to it. So maybe that is the end goal. What is the end goal for that specific work session is something that you're going to want to identify, right? By the end of this work session, I want to have a list of cases that I'm going to read and a preliminary outline for my memo, right? If it's a brief that you're writing for court, I want to have the fact section written out and I want to have half of the annotations already done. So give yourself some metrics, some specific measurable metrics that you can achieve during your work session so that you know at the end of it whether or not you have accomplished what it is you set out to do. I've got a very early podcast episode number 6, where I talk about setting goals. It's all about how to set goals. I would invite you to listen to that because you can use that strategy for big goals. You can also use it for small goals, right? You've got a small goal, something that you're trying to accomplish over the course of a few hours. It never hurts you to set yourself up on a path of what you want that goal to be and how you're going to go about achieving it. So again, you're back to your tasks. You've identified exactly what it is that you want to produce. This is also going to help you with overwhelm, right? If you have this vague task, I mean, think about it in terms of your house. If I look at the kitchen table and I think, I have to tidy the kitchen table, that feels really overwhelming to me. Whereas if I were to say, okay, I'm going to take all the kid art and put that in one pile. I'm going to take all the knickknacks and put that in another pile. I'm going to take all my work papers and put that in another pile. If I start breaking that down into categories, now it's a lot more doable. It's a lot more actionable. I feel less overwhelmed. So same holds true for you. Think about the tasks that you have. When you describe them very generally, how does that make you feel versus when you describe it more specifically? How much more engaged, how much more able and excited do you feel relative to when it's this kind of less precise, more nebulous task ahead of you? So step 2 follows on that step 1, right? You've already identified the deliverable. Now we're going to look at the itemized step to get there. So if you think about what you need to do to get to that goal, you can break it down. And I highly recommend giving yourself a little checklist. I do this all the time. I have scrap papers or notebooks. I buy them at the dollar store. They're not huge. They're just the right size for me. How much are they? They're like, I don't know, maybe 15 by 10 centimeters. I'm kind of eyeballing it right now. Anyways, it's a little pad of paper. And whenever I have a task, I itemize it in little bullet points. And then as I go, I cross off each aspect of the list. This is really, really helpful. I don't write legal briefs, but I create presentations. I create podcasts. I draft emails. I design content. I do tasks that are multi-step, and I love having them all written out in a list so that I can organize my thinking. I can organize my time, get things done one by one. I will also do this for my day, right? If I am looking at my day and I'm thinking, okay, there's really 5 things I need to do today, I will write bullet points so that I know in my mind's eye that here's the sequence that we're going to follow. So that can just help in terms of that overwhelm. I love getting things out of my brain, right? I love for you to get things out of your brain, right? Anytime you're holding something in your memory, that is your working memory. That's part of your executive functioning skills. It is getting tired, right? It's like that open window on a browser, or if you think about your phone, right, your iPhone, you're out in the wilderness and, your batteries are on and it's trying to connect, right? Your phone is trying to connect to some source of internet and it's trying so hard and the batteries are depleting because it cannot connect. That's what's happening when we're keeping things inside of our brain, right? We do not want to use our brain as a storage locker. So write things out. Give yourself some cues. For me, I think the physical, tangible things that I can see, write, feel, that makes it feel real to me. It's almost therapeutic to write it down and then to cross it off. So for you, what is the equivalent? How can you break down and itemize a task where you're going to be able to feel tangibly connected to that task, that you know what the steps are ahead of you, that you feel like you can do those steps? That's what we want to do. We want to, first of all, identify the goal, right? Then we want to itemize the steps that you're going to take in order to achieve that goal. You're going to have that list. And then we're going to move on to the third part. And where we are right now, we've kind of identified some big picture protocol pieces, right? I realize I'm probably confusing you a little bit in terms of steps, right? The big steps are 1, know your triggers. 2, anticipate what you're going to want to do in the moment. Step 3 is what you will choose to do instead. Step 4 is identify why it matters. 5 is follow your protocol. And this that we're in right now is identifying what that protocol looks like. So we've done the health check, the space and time check, plan and execute. This is why I will put this all in a checklist for you. So then you don't have to kind of piece it all together. But this is the plan and execute. And so we're in that step 3, which is a time estimate. So here, what you want to do is take your task and think about the time it's going to take. So there may be a big picture time estimate, right? This is a task that I'm giving myself several months to accomplish. I spoke last week about our house project. So I have a project for our house. The deadline is end of June of next year. So that's, 6 months or something. No, 8, 9 months from when I initially set the goal. You might have work projects that are like that, but there's a big long-term goal. And then when you sit down, right, that procrastination piece, that's when you want to think about what is the immediate goal? How much time are you going to spend? Is it 15 minutes? Is it an hour? Is it 2 hours? So you want to give yourself a time estimate for your work session. And then you want to choose however many items make sense. I'm going to give you the number of 1 to 3 items to pick. And you don't want to look so far ahead that you're overwhelming yourself, but what are the next 1 to 3 steps you can do? And then you want to initiate. And there are lots of tools you can use to initiate action. One of them is the Pomodoro method. That's the idea of setting a timer, right? It's based on the Italian tomato timers. I gather in Italy, they use kitchen timers. They look like a tomato. You can set it for 15 minutes, 25 minutes, whatever is going to work for you. It doesn't really matter. The minute you set that timer on, it's going to initiate that feeling of wanting to get started. You only have to work for the duration of that timer. What will very likely happen is once you're in that task, you're going to get that momentum. You're going to keep going. And that will be enough to initiate the task. You've now overcome that first part of procrastination and you're in your task. Another way to initiate is to just pick an item, right? If you think about a salami tube, for example, cut into slices, you just want to pick one. So I like to think of the pizza method, right? Either you've got the salami that you're putting on the pizza, or you've got the tomato that's going to be part of the sauce. These are ways to get started. And then another thing that you can do, I find this is also really effective, is just ask yourself the question, what is the next step? What is the easiest step? What is the step that will make me get the furthest? What's the step that I'm most likely to want to do? So ask yourself a question that will bring you into initiation. And then from there, we're going to do the task. So you're going to be working, you're reviewing the documents, you're reading the cases, you're drafting the memo, you're writing the email, you're scheduling the conversation and making notes to go into it. So you're doing now. And as you do it, as you execute, you get to check off that list. So if you have that itemized list, you're now checking it off and you're feeling really, really good about the fact that you are getting things done. And then once you're done, right? So work as long as you want, right? If you find that you're being really productive and you want to spend more time, then do it. If you're not putting off something else that needs to get done, use that time, get the job done. Your future self will be very happy because you've now completed the task. And if you get to the end of your time frame and you feel like, okay, that's all I have in me today, great. You can finish. You've done the thing that you said you were going to do. You've built that sense of trust and accountability with yourself so you can finish. Now, before you do anything else at this stage, if this is an ongoing project, I would invite you to write out your next steps, right? Maybe you record your time, right? If that's part of your practice, this might be a good time for you to just pop over into your docketing mechanism and record the time. But I'd also invite you to think about what are the next steps on that project, because where you are right now in a task is important. You may lose sight of it if you don't make a record of it. So write it down and write yourself a fresh list, a fresh itemized task list, because it'll be so clear to you right now. And then when you go back to the task, you've already done yourself that favor of setting yourself up for the next steps. So you want to do that. And when you get back to your task, right? Maybe it's the next day, you might look at that list again and rewrite the list, right? Maybe the order that you wrote it out in the day before doesn't really feel like the right approach. So you can always rewrite that task list. But the idea here again is you want to take things out of your working memory, put them on paper, file it away with that project so that when you come back to it, you know where you left off, you know where you're going, and you no longer have to kind of go through that exercise of rethinking where you were, what needs to get done. And then finally, you get to reward yourself, a pat on the back, a walk around the block. Maybe it's that pumpkin spice latte that you were thinking about at the beginning that you didn't go and get. Maybe it's a conversation with a friend, a phone call, whatever feels right to you. Maybe it's dinner with your friends. Whatever it is that you like to do to celebrate because you've now finished that thing. You've not procrastinated. You've taken action. You've completed the task. So again, just to review what planning looks like, it means identifying the results sought. It's itemizing the steps that are going to be required to get there. It's giving yourself a bit of a time estimate, right? In the moment, how long are you devoting to that task? It's choosing 1 to 3 items off that item list that you're going to do in that work session. It's then initiating using some sort of a tool, whether it's Pomodoro or salami slices, or asking yourself a question like, what is the next step? It's then executing. So you're doing the task, right? You're checking things off as you go. When you're done, you write yourself a little note about where you're going to pick up next time, and then you reward yourself. Okay. So you've now got this protocol, right? This is your equivalent of fire alarm goes off and you want to run out of the school in a hurry. No, we've got a plan. This is the plan. This is what you're going to do. So we've spent some time now already designing a protocol. If you have been following along, and I appreciate it may be hard to follow along in a podcast, especially if you're doing something else, if you're walking the dog or you're doing the dishes or you're walking around the neighborhood or whatever it is, driving, especially, you're probably not taking notes if you're driving. I hope not. So it may be hard. Again, there will be a nice printed out checklist. So it'll be easier to see in words, in writing, what we're getting at here. But you will design a protocol that works for you so that when you're in that code P situation, right, you have that task to do. It's a dreaded task, right? It's the equivalent of the kitchen table in your legal practice. You now have a plan. You have that awareness of what's going on, and you've got a protocol that you're going to follow. So a couple more things is you're going to design your protocol and then you're going to test it. And you'll notice that there are things that work and there are things that don't work. So you get to adapt your protocol as you go. You might also start to notice new areas where you're procrastinating, right? That's great. Add them into your list. Now you've got more information about yourself and more data that you can use to deal with situations where you're going to want to procrastinate. And then finally, what I'd invite you to do as well is as you get better at managing procrastination is to notice what I refer to as this big P procrastination. Sometimes I think we look at these smaller pieces of procrastination and we think, there's something wrong with me. I'm just a procrastinator. I, have such a hard time initiating tasks. And that may be true, right? Maybe there are areas where you procrastinate. But if you're finding that there's a large percentage of the work that you do where you just don't want to do it, this might not be so much a sign that you struggle with task initiation and perhaps more of a sign that there's something bigger going on here, right? Maybe there's a lack of alignment between your practice area, the way that you work, where you work, what you're working on, and what you're truly interested in which case you may want to be revisiting some bigger questions, right? Like, what is going on here? Why is it really that hard for me to get initiated on these tasks? And do I want to look at a bigger picture question here and come up with a bigger picture solution, right? So I'll leave that with you to think about, are these micro incidents of procrastination a reflection of something bigger? Maybe, maybe not, right? You will know. So with that, I am going to say thank you for joining me. You can tell probably I get really excited about procrastination because I think it's something that we all do, and because I think we have so much leverage when we start to dig into it and develop tools for ourselves so that we can actually overcome that procrastination and get the things done that we want to do and have greater awareness over areas where maybe we're not really as successful in dealing with procrastination, and then choosing, do we want to create a protocol for that? Do we want to move those things up the priority list, or are we going to look at those opportunities or look at those incidents as a sign that maybe this is something that we want to reconsider in the bigger picture? So I will leave that with you, my dear friend. Thank you again for joining me. It's been such a pleasure, and I look forward to reconnecting with you again next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.